Speaking of art, this is art. You have a space dedicated to art, and architecture is an art, although some say it's just maths, but no, it's more than that. That's why we are here to discuss. And speaking of art, Adrian Papahaji once said, architecture is the only art in which a lack of ethics can have lethal consequences. But where does aesthetics end? And where does ethics begin? Is there a clear line between good and evil in architecture? Or is there just a gray zone where decisions become an ongoing negotiation? We will discover the answers in the moments to come, in the hours maybe. But before we dive into that, allow me to share a few words about the broader context of this meeting, meaning this BATRA, Transylvanian Architecture Biennale. In 2025, it marks its 7th edition. This event runs until tomorrow in the afternoon, maybe in the night. We will also party, so please be there. And is organized by the Order of Architects of Romania Transylvanian Branch in partnership with ORE branches of Bihor, Nord-Vest, Alba and Satu Mare, with the support of the National ORA through the architecture stamp. And it is my honor, my great honor, to invite Daniela Meyer, architect and president of the Order in Transylvania, to have a few words of welcoming. She organizes everything.
It's really a great honor, and just a few words. Perhaps we are also a proof, like Kalin, that if you put more soul than money, you can realize good things, because that happened with our Biennale too. But still, you are all here, and it's really honorable to know that in this place there are architects representing all the branches of the Order of Architects, and also the National Order, and also architects from Italy, from Cairo, and from students and universities from different branches. It's really an honor, and that means that we succeeded in explaining that we want to talk. We want to talk about architecture, about details, about why and how should we act in order to respect what we promise to ourselves when we choose to be architects, and to have such an impact in the spaces that we act, we represent our ideas, and we respond to people's wishes. So, thank you all. And I will just tell you a few words about this evening. Our proposal was, and I think it will be wonderful to hear first the presentation of Professor Marcel Smets regarding the ideas around the theme of the Biennale that we proposed. And then we will invite Professor Adrian Papahaji to have a dialogue around these subjects that challenge us in our field and before we act as architects. To continue the presentation and to somehow mediate the dialogue after, I will invite my friend, our colleague, Associate Professor Cristina Purcar, and I'm really honored to have her here and grateful for her to accept this invitation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniela. Thank you to the Order of Architects. I am also highly honored of having the occasion, the honor to have this role this evening. Let me first introduce the first of our two special guests of the evening, Professor Marcel Smets. Many of you already are acquainted with Professor Smets because it's not his first time in Romania and in Cluj, but still let me say very few words. He's an emeritus professor of the Catholic University in Leuven, Belgium, and most recently, since yesterday actually, he's a doctor honoris causa of our Technical University here in Cluj. We are very happy about that. He's a professor and an academician of the Flemish Royal Academy, section of the arts. He is a long-standing and outstanding urban designer throughout his career. He has been active in urbanism and urban design within his own team, project team Stats Antwerp within the university, then as an independent a consultant in urban design, and later on as a senior advisor for the urbanism office org in Belgium. He has been a Flemish government architect for the Flemish region, between 2005 and 2010. And he is especially known and appreciated for his academic and designerly contributions to the urban reintegration and regeneration of former industrial areas or derelict infrastructures. Without much further ado, I would invite Professor Smets to share us his intriguing contribution.
Dear Daniela and the organizers of the BATRA, thank you for having me again. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm very delighted to speak to you in this jazz club, nightclub. I think at least you won't fall asleep immediately in this setting. In respect with Daniela, who's the curator of this BATRA, and as you know, she wrote a text of one A4, but quite meaningful, and I jotted down three, in my view, quite important elements regarding the theme. Namely, first, beauty of architecture is subjective, and in the absence of ethical considerations, it has no real value. Two, ethics in architecture is impossible to define, and moral principles are reflected in the ethics of professional practice. Three, it is crucial to see the architectural object as a culmination of a journey that involves various stakeholders. So, in other words, more bluntly, first, an aesthetic without ethics is meaningless and should be dismissed. Two, ethical architecture does not exist on its own. It is intrinsically linked to the moral standards of the profession. Three, contemporary architecture involves many stakeholders, and such a multiplicity entails that ethical architecture is grounded in a decision-making process shared on ethical principles. As an outset, I concur with these statements. However, I propose we expand on them. Within a professional organization, such as the Order of Architects, Daniela's text argues for a code of conduct, promoting an ethical professional approach for architects and urban designers today. By doing so, she is implying that existing deontological codes do not guarantee to realize this goal. And second, her text also states that achieving such a standard is dependent on the synergy between client, investor, building team, and public administration involved in the building and implementation process. Oops, what is happening? It's okay. Pursuing this analysis, I attempted to rephrase Daniela's observations and streamline the debate. One, given the habitual nature of the ontological codes, we should rather look for a moral compass, in my opinion, than a set professional code. Two, the position of architects and urban designers has profoundly changed with the evolution from serving individual builders and small investors to assisting large-scale and often speculative conglomerates. But three, this new constellation does not exempt us from the fundamental choice of the work we want to be engaged in, of the project which we want to see built. Do we want these projects that I projected on the right side? Three important subjects keep on appearing in codes regulating professional behavior. Because if we're talking about architectural codes, maybe it is interesting to look at how other professions deal with their codes. So I went to look to medicine, to law, engineering, and see how they deal with it. And what you see is that three elements always reoccur. There are rules about financial compensation of provided services. There are regulations involving decisions around the right treatment or the apt technical solution. And there are instructions about professional independence and judicious distance vis-à-vis the client. What I didn't always find, what I personally would add, is a fourth one, namely the moral or social justification of the services we want to be delivered. Let's take the first one, financial compensation. All professional codes, from medical doctors, barristers, engineers, and architects, mention conventions as to the financial compensation to be charged for specific employments. Such a table listing the costs of professional actions has two purposes. The first is to assess the comparative value of each action in terms of technical difficulty or scarcity of competent individuals or institutions able to perform it. And the second is to balance the competition between practitioners by avoiding dumping prices. In practice, we know it doesn't always work like that. The disparity between the compensation professionals consider righteous and the amounts prospective clients are able to pay is sometimes quite a gap. And the market conditions bring that experts in high demand increase their wages. And so it leads to class distinction. Second element. Medical deontology acknowledges the justified expectation of patients to receive the right treatment. It proposes to present different options and reach a decision about the most adequate cure in common understanding with the patient. Deontologically, engineers, on the other side, do not only have to secure stability, but also optimize systems of heating, drainage, and ventilation, with regard to improving sustainability, they have to review the choice of materials, insulation or heat exposure, and apply suitable techniques for climate control and resilient constructions. So in both professions, the meaning of capable action forms an important aspect of the professional aptitude. Right solutions cannot be simply described. They come about in dialogue after evaluating all possible alternatives. In the realm of the quickly evolving techniques, the accurate answer requires an in-depth evaluation of costs versus efficiency. Oops, there is a problem. What is happening here? Sorry for the inconvenience for you especially, but there is no synchronization between the screen, your screen and my screen. So, in the case of Paris, we just said that for engineers and medicine, it is the right treatment is a question of dialogue, and it's a question of assessing the right techniques through, constant up and down. In the case of barristers and architects, the course of action stems from a deus ex machina. In these professions, the capacity of judgment is an inherent part of professional competence. It is an intrinsic component of appropriate expertise. In a way, being a good practitioner equals holding good judgment and recognizing the best solution. In my opinion, the focus in medical and engineering ethics on developing solutions through alternative proposals, carefully redesigned and chosen in close partnership with the client, could serve as a valuable model for architects as well. Such a procedure demonstrates a commitment to quality, which is important to embrace. Let's hope. Yeah. Third element, the instructions about professional independence. The need to have an independent position with regard to the service providers you are professionally bound to control appears in the ethical codes of all examined practices. The principle inspires two mandatory conditions for aptly exercising one job. The first is the incompatibility of acting as party and judge. Related to the architect, it refers to the somewhat outdated version that the client is served by harassing the contractor. Second element is the obligation of remaining impartial and establish an unbiased relationship between engineer and contractor, between investor and developer, between public administration and landowner. The fulfillment of such intermediate position is often identified with the status of the self-employed practitioner. Yet, not all self-employed individuals are unbiased or disinterested. While many employees or civil servants succeed in looking at things from a distance and raising to the occasion. In that sense, the legitimate claim of being independent from external influences is not so much related to economic status, but to the ethical attitude of the expert in question. For architects and urban designers, and we are now dealing about my point, the moral compass, deciding which job is morally right relates to the nature of the mission and to the composition of the consortium one is integrated. In relation to the first, we can say that the brief of the assignment that makes a mission worthy is that the program must open up the chances for a balanced project. The urbanistic regulations must be coherent with the task. The spatial quality, sustainable construction methods, water management must be as important as prize for awarding the commission. And the second point with relation to the composition of the consortium, more and more important, is that today substantial commissions are increasingly granted to consortia mostly led by developers, submitting with a team including all required expertise. As designer architect, one can only function in such a setup when one is respected or needed by the developer and accepted by the fellow technicians in the team. In the field of law, justice provides that all accused are entitled to a competent representation in court and an honest trial. Perpetrators only turn into criminals when proven guilty. So, for the law, barristers exist for defending suspects and see that justice is done. In that sense, barristers must use their competence to have the criminal tried by the book. The reverse is not true, however. Barristers are supposed to serve justice, not to work for criminals. If barristers use their knowledge of the law to absolve critical acts, they no longer serve justice, but legitimize unlawful action. By outsmarting the law, they prevent justice. I reckon we all agree that engaging one's competence for exonerating wrongdoings and decreasing charges for white-collar offenders is immoral and corrupt. Barristers who act in this manner turn into accomplices, architects too. They help to find an unlawful society in which the crimes their clients have been acquitted from become the norm. So, applied to architecture and urbanism, unethical behavior of barristers reads as follows. 1. Do not engage in projects you would not want to live in yourself. Refuse to set actions that go against better judgment because they jeopardize safety, are unsustainable or socially disruptive. Use your expertise, on the contrary, to bring clients to more performative, more advantageous, or more contextually relevant alternatives. 2. Refuse to collaborate in shady settings. Decline commissions from unpredictable or untrustworthy clients, and be certain not to risk your reputation in administering what you detect to be deceitful operations. 3. Do not contribute to empowering segregation, social injustice or class distinction. I trust we basically all agree in this room on the essence of these principles. Discerning the form in which they appear, however, remains a matter of personal appreciation. Ascertaining what is ethical or unethical, which behavior is moral or immoral, is not yet collectively shared within the architectural and urban design community. So, in that sense, I think it's quite important to start by giving or to start investigating this kind of field of morality, immorality, and what we would think about it. So let's begin with the easy parts, the so-called extremes. I think we agree that we should not be erecting unsound buildings or contribute to unhealthy conditions. Yet what to say, for instance, with this earthquake in Turkey a year ago, where apartment buildings fell down like cart houses, and we had thousands and thousands of victims in apartment buildings that were built by developers and architects. We all know that we should not be building in flood zones, but I don't know how it is in Romania, but I can assure you it's still an ongoing battle in Belgium. Sorry, now into the phone. Well, I'll skip the first one. So it's not always easy to decide what is sound or unsound. Let me give you an example that is very clear. The limits of what is permissible, in my opinion, are blurry. What do we think, for instance, of large peripheral shopping malls that reduce activity? Okay, it's with delay, so let's keep the pollution and go to the shopping malls. I mean, we see at least everywhere in France, it is one of the great problems because the former land of small villages is completely drawn away, all the activity in these kind of larger malls that are made in between. And by building those, we relegate the life of city centers in smaller towns to tourist food consumption. Is that what we really want? Although nobody may think that building a shopping mall that is architecturally viable is something unethical. Another example that is quite clear is social discrimination. I think none of us has any doubt that the walls that are erected to segregate Palestinian community from the Jewish in Israel are something that should not be allowed. Yet, when we look at less harsh situations, things become much less clear. When it comes to conceiving gated communities, for instance, housing only destined for rich, some of our colleagues exhaust themselves in pursuing models ensuing models, they hope will appeal to the prospective clients of the developer for whom they work. One could even make the argument that the gated community is becoming a universal model of so-called safe living, but I would say social discrimination. And I used a few examples here that go from Malaysia to Nigeria to United States to Dubai to Pakistan, and in South Africa there are many, and so forth. So, what to think about social injustice and the way we improve it? So, in an attempt to sharpen the meaning, because we have seen that the meaning is sometimes very blurry, I hopefully arrive at a shared understanding on how to behave as an expert in our field today, I suggest to openly bring my own conduct to the table, and I let you judge it. So this assignment, this assessment is not intended as a model, but as an initiation to a more fruitful and practice-oriented debate, starting off from real situations and coping with the way we reacted on them. Many of you will have lived through similar circumstances. For that reason, this account of my personal experience directing my own team or consulting with org architecture and urbanism can be exemplary. Not in the sense that it sets a standard, but that it opens up a discussion by making matters tangible. However, I have to begin with the fact that my career is already going on for a number of decades, and that the situations now and when I started to design in the 90s is not absolutely the same. So as an excuse for some of the things that are happening today and that didn't happen then, we should know that the 90s, at least in our Western European context, because I heard yesterday that this is maybe not the same in the Romanian context. But in the evolution of societies, there often are moments of this kind, so I want to name them. The moments of experiment. And for promising architects like myself, the inspiring societal conditions of the 90s created a sense of experiment. Practices were oriented to new problems and required innovative approaches. Commissions were increasingly administered through competitions based on architectural quality. Through prizes, magazines, exhibitions, innovating design concepts and attitude became culturally rewarded and socially appreciated. And as a result, private developers grew more and more inclined to engage well-regarded architects to win public competitions for them. So practically all the significant urban projects I supervised during my career as urban designer stem from such exceptional concurrence of determinant factors, namely the opportunity of converting derelict land, often in public hands, the ambition of the public authorities to operate a meaningful change beneficial to the whole community, the ensuing preparedness to attribute municipal or state budgets to realizing the intervention or part of it, the will to control private investors and gear them into constructive public-private partnerships. So, in a way, my commissions started off from a sort of evident, sort of natural ethical foundation. In the case of Leuven, I think this is evident. In the case of Nantes, for instance, where formal industrial land finally, for its conversion, belonged to the municipal development agency Samoa because they had a right of purchase any land that became available. And so they owned the land, which they then redistributed to the private developers, but of course with the urbanistic conditions that they had in mind. And this was a way to keep on going, not only with relation to the volume and the kind of forms that you wanted to have, but also with relation to the program, the shops on the ground floor, all the services, and so forth. And finally, in the Scrum project I managed in Antwerp for the last years, we also noticed that the reuse of infrastructural land and a public budget for improving living conditions in compensation of completing the Antwerp Ring motorway was available. Together with the existence of a comprehensive public contract with urbanism for managing the decision-making processes. So we stepped in, we didn't have to question what we were doing or whether it was right. We just had to do it in the right way. But, I'm sorry, this was not, for those who don't know. This had to do with the Antwerp Ring, where indeed, many of these projects are now, being realized, but they were all constructed together with the concerned citizens. But I use these examples because they had a positive outcome. There is a problem when the design projects are only mildly supported. For instance, in the project of Rouen, our suggested gradual development of bays for common life, the yellow indications, into the outworn industrial texture, well, it was scheduled on private land. The idea was to bring a number of plots, industrial plots together and make the parking collective. Because of that, you had space becoming available, and to lay out that space, make it available for public life. And in this way, get an increase of quality and the beginning of a change of the area. But no public funds were made available to stimulate this progressive improvement of the public realm on former parking lots, and nothing happened. Yeah. And so the same area today, from the air, you see that there is some waterfront development along the Seine, but basically, the industrial sites that we were talking about 25 years ago are still more or less the same. In Genoa, we suggested an elongated long park as a compensation for the expansion of the Voltri container terminal. And this park would be created, as you see in the section, by bringing the existing railway and roads together in one bundle so that a lot of space became available to make a park. And this win-win, however, required heavy investments on the side of the railway and road administration, and never succeeded to be built. So up till this day, the chaotic deployment that you see on the left photograph is still existing. Clearly, all so-called investigatory urban projects I showed were ethically justified. Fundamentally, their ambition of novelty targeted the improvement of public life. Yet, their design and implementation rested, as I showed, heavily on the straightforward relationship between designer and public client, on the availability of public funds, and so forth. Today, when the client is not typically a private person nor a public body, but a consortium of interests, landowners, developers, investment companies, the question of ethical rightness has become more complex. In my view, deciding on whether we want to be involved in a pending enterprise is no longer black and white. Moral grounds are not divided by a thin line, but present themselves in a spectrum, like the rings of Saturn. For that reason, the course of action we should take is not determined by general principles. It demands to be steered by a truthful assessment of each situation at hand. And so I would like to conclude this lecture by evaluating, if it comes, voila. Yeah, and when it goes. By evaluating 4 projects that Urbanism, the company I advised, has been involved with over the years, and how we wanted to deal with it. So they are really very timely projects because they actually happened, they were done in the last years. But they raise questions. And I can tell you how in the office we tried to cope with these questions. But I leave it up to you as to evaluate whether this was the right course or not. The first is a very questionable project, and the question is, can a questionable project be rectified with commendable urban design principles? We are dealing with Montasa, and Montasa is supposed to, it's not yet built, supposed to become an artificial island in front of Alexandria in Egypt. And the competition brief was clear. It said from the outset 2 elements that basically you cannot agree with. One is to create a new island that would close off Alexandria from the sea. And the second is to create on that island only housing for wealthy newcomers. So ORC was one of the 5 teams invited in an international sort of competition. And it tried to deal with these questionable elements by creating a settlement structure that would be rather unique, and that would not be just an allotment for rich village people, but that would use the water system. And that would use the water system and the landscape differentiation as a basis for the new project. On the other hand, the idea was that we would introduce a leisurely kind of movement that would be profoundly different from the mainland. Mobility hubs would be installed at the foothill of the landing bridges that came from the mainland, boat access on the canal system, small electric vans along the sea promenade. And so by doing that, you arrived at a sort of a settlement which was quite exceptional in the sense that it did not exist, that it had a sort of leisurely kind of living, and that we would also install more collectively oriented buildings in order to enjoy and to have a sort of different social incomes possibly living there. Now the question is whether or not this wonderful idea for Montasa was right. Second question is Leuven-Noord, and where an oppressing grief, can it be rectified by a creative interpretation of its loopholes? You'll see the site in yellow, and the site has a very elongated, stretched form. It's also on a plateau, so it's lying much higher in a way than the surrounding area, and it is partly polluted ground. So we began with building only on the non-polluting ground and using the non-polluting ground to put a sort of cover on the polluted ground, which would then allow to create park. Three elements were paramount. One was a sort of landscape differentiation, as you see, with rain gardens between the big urbanized zones, with a sort of buffer zone and an elongated park that was to extend the existing provincial park. The second was a very particular kind of movement system that would separate the cars from the slow traffic and would be immediately linked to the motorway, so it would not have repercussions on the urban traffic. And the third was a sort of system of creating blocks, large blocks, which would have a different kind of infill. In the model, I think you can see how the idea of the park was intended to extend the existing park and be one of the really primary elements of the new settlement. On the question of the infill, we organized kind of big lots and regulations of potential infill, because of course over time this might be different. We didn't know the program, but we were sure to have the highest density away from the existing settlement and to create a sort of consistent facade, urban facade towards the park. The rare elements of differentiation, because it was the whole new program was intended for a production zone of high scientific new businesses. But some housing was allowed, and we tried to concentrate that in two hubs, in in order to have some life in these places. With regard to the service road, we constituted a sort of berm of varying form and height between the railway and the new zone, which made, in our view, created the possibility of making the road into a landscape, one, and on the other hand, you know, the former was the backside, the front side would become a very open, spacious place, enjoyable for people and in contact with the rest of the city. Without clear support from interest group or stakeholders, the impact of the urban designer is limited to his or her capacity of conviction. Presenting strong arguments and showing how things could improve undoubtedly counts, but doesn't prevent experts to remain dependent upon the goodwill of decision makers. Only when these are under pressure of investors, action groups or representatives of the middle field will they be inclined to follow a course contrary to their daily routine. And for that reason, both projects that I just covered had a limited implication. The Montaza one was a restricted competition where org was the only team stressing ecological awareness. Other competitors gave way to the expectations of the organizers and projected different variants of high-status villa allotments for the rich, and obviously one of those for one. The Leuven Noord was developed in dialogue with a committee of the stakeholders, the city, the university, the railway infrastructure company, but in absence of the real decision makers that were behind those sitting around the table. So no amendment of the rather unmanageable objectives with regard to density program or pre-imposed views on infrastructural accessibility appeared possible. The involvement of org at least led to broadening the initial view. It made multifunctional scientific clustering acceptable, conducted to an agreement on our proposed framework for landscape and public space design, and made the city realize the necessity of purchasing the land from the railway to get things done. I don't know where to point. The last two examples, and I'll go as quickly as I can, are very recent, but show how an involvement from the civic society can really make things move. The first one is in Brussels, in the south of Brussels, in Ixelles, and there was a very huge area owned by Deleuze, an important shopping mall company, and what the project ambitioned is that a new sort of shopping center would be at the heart of a borough regeneration. But that was only possible because after a lengthy procedure of building permits that were not accepted by the Brussels region, Deleuze, the department store, was pushed to accept a multifunctional building program with housing units, production units, neighborhood vegetation, and multimodal access as a compensation to expand and specialize its commercial unit and parking garage. So under the supervision of the Brussels bouwmeester maître architect, Deleuze Real Estate then launched a restricted competition in 2 phases between 4 consortia of developers, architects, and technical experts. Our consortium won the competition by playing out different ways in which the readjustment of the shopping center would benefit the neighborhood. The first is by assuring the needed expansion of vicinity urban spaces. So we foresaw 2 new urban spaces, le Pavis du Lion, le Parc Jules Deleuze. The second was by the interiorization of the logistics, because of course the supermarket and all what it was about needed a lot of logistics. But how do you associate the hinder that this caused with the living and dwelling environment? We thought by separating as much as possible, interiorizing the traffic of lorries and so forth, so that the outside would remain silent and potentially green. The third element had to do with, okay, I'm skipping. The third element had to do with building, with mixing production and dwelling. And so, for instance, what happened was that we will foresee new dwellings on top of workshops, which the workshops have a much wider depth than the dwelling. And this allows for what you see here, sort of terraces on top of the roofs of the ateliers, creating quite an acceptable interior environment. And doing that, you had, of course, a number of qualities also potentially in the housing development. Not only in these housing, but if I can move this thing, yeah, also in the next, where we have, for instance, a centrally a sort of block of production units, and then inner courts around, which means, of course, you don't have people looking in the inner courts and so forth and so on. The fifth element I'm very sorry, it shouldn't be the case. The fifth element had to do with the fact of how do you uplift the existing situation with the new addition. And that's, for instance, the reason why we organized a setback, which then would allow the sunlight to go on the houses, existing houses on the other side of the street. The setback organized a wider street, as you see on the left on the picture, and a greener street, and all of that. That's also beneficial to the existing environment. That's also why we kept some elements of the existing heritage, you know, like the passage under which the tramway goes, or the maison de maître that existed, and so forth. So, last example. It's a good thing we don't need the PowerPoint for the discussion. Last element, our last example, is the Brooklyn project, a mixed complex of production unit, workplaces, shops, musical theater, and so forth. Again, we arrived on the scene after the fact that another project had been relegated existence. Civic protests, heavy civic protests, newspapers, and so forth, forced UPlace, the developer, to we draw a project for a vast shopping and leisure center from the original brook side that you see in the white on the picture of the left, which gives you an idea of the impoverished community of Vilvoorde bordering the Northern Canal, the railway and the motorway fringe. So we arrived on the scene by trying out another strategy of conversion, where we took into consideration not only our site, but all the existing available industrial sites also in the neighborhood. And we tried to fit the Brookside in a global strategy of regenerating the city through the conversion of these large properties. Complementary to the housing, offices and amenities projected on the other sides, we elaborated on a mutually enriching system of production, consumption, culture creation, training and education. A program that would not only serve Vilvoorde, but would be beneficial to the Brussels region at large. And the key element is what you see here in a few sketches, is the idea not to have a shopping mall, but to have a place where you can shop the goods that are produced in the spot itself. So you make production shops in different fields, nutrition, chemistry, textile. You reuse, what the city is leaving and supposedly cannot use anymore. And you reuse that to make new products, which then can be made, to fit the individual person, but can also, of course, mix sort of working with consumption. To oppose the prototype of the commercial mall, we return to the idea of the industrial hall, so common for this peripheral implantation of the Brussels canal and railway vicinities. In this low-lying area, natural drainage was paramount. Maximum concentration of hardened surfaces helped to liberate open land in a coherent landscape figure, giving access to the halls and have visitors move around in all directions without harming this figure. And this was obtained by a system of strips. As you see, strips are in the north-south in green and pockets in red. Actually, a very simple system. And even if they appear as three individual units, the halls thus form a system of flows in all directions, abutting onto the adjacent landscape. I really thank you for your patience. According to the demand, each hall, while containing shops selling goods produced on site, is open to complementary activities in the higher floors. So visitors and employees meet, retail and city life intermingle. Depending on the nature of the complementary activities, the whole gains a specific form, subject to conditions for settlement and inhabitation that spring from each volumetric treatment. Clusters of secondary activities coagulate and strengthen the character of each whole as a particular space. To to oppose the stereotype form of the commercial mall, our ambition leaned on having the alignment of differentiated tree structure continue in the buildings and thus create an awareness inside the halls of the natural environment around them. Finally, in an attempt to captivate an essential constituent of city life in this peripheral location, we imagined a mix of activities that would draw different numbers and sorts of people to the place throughout the day in the week, producing altered alternatives and social behavior. Like you see, for instance, in the coupled renderings with and without people in weekdays and on weekends. A few months ago, an agreement was reached between all stakeholders on the basis of our project. Intensive negotiation and dialogue had molded the initial commercial recreational mall into a complex regeneration project for the Brussels impoverished periphery. The original developers remained on board during this process, even if the bargaining was often on the cutting edge. The architect in this case really engaged, and I quote Alexander Doge, the main designer of this project, engaged in a dance with the devil. Up to you to say whether it was worth it. As designers, we are often confronted with commissions that are somehow harmful to the public good. They may benefit certain parties, but they do not improve urban or environmental quality in general. Moreover, they have even sharpened inequality. They may sharpen inequality and prove detrimental to those who were not represented in the decision-making process. For that reason, it is our ethical duty of designers to evaluate the impact on the urban mobility and environmental systems of the project we are part of, understanding and showing how the planned interventions affect the existing is the first step towards improvement. Can we make the difference? Question mark. Our design investigations can certainly demonstrate unsuspected potentials. The rationale of our proposal and the tenacity of our involvement, on the other hand, can positively help to improve the urban and environmental value of the project. If we are bound to conform to the client, we should not underestimate our capacity to weigh on the outcome. In our turbulent times, where speculative investments increasingly press developers to set building regulations that hardly allow for a qualitative project, architects and urban designers inevitably turn into rope dancers. Constantly searching for the right equilibrium between honor and financial gain. As practitioners, they are bound to engage in a dance with the devil, fully aware of the tight conditions in which they operate, yet bring the macabre dancing companion to contribute far more than he initially wanted to. In this sense, morally justified actions require an enlargement of the normal playing field. To get there, the architect or urban designer cannot maneuver on his or her own. He or she must rely on the support of well-intentioned civic influences and of a competent public authority. Only together can they counter the immense pressure of landowners, investors, and lobbyists. In my view, it is precisely this lacking reciprocal support of designers and public authorities that explains why significant urban interventions do not thrive today. Let us be aware of this dilemma and act accordingly. Thank you very much.
During this talk, for the technical difficulties,